Hey people, I was reading where I said I would, and some words got me sidetracked, and it brought me to this word for deceitful, the trimit. And the base word for this is the marm. You know, marm is the teacher, and it comes from the word from Rama. Rama was the first teacher. And it ran me into this word here, shall make afraid. And this is the word married. You know, married, making tremble, to frighten them away. Oh, she's married. Disturb, make them afraid. Hey, let's get married. And so I know that's what that means, because, you know, it comes, M is from, and her, and ID is hand, from her hand. May I have your daughter's hand, and from her hand. And, you know, I often read this MH as much, and much rid. To much rid of. Just show them your hand, girl, and much be rid. She'll make them run away. And I was looking at these different words they give to deceitful when I run into this. And lies. Lies is the cause in. Ooh, what caused this? Well, it's because the earth spins and it causes the planets to revolve. That's lies. That's where that come from. But I first noticed this in this word, marm, that you see come up often with this word falsehood, the cause in, to marm. And marm is a teacher. Back before teachers, we had marms in the school. And so they're telling us that these teachers are deceitful, and the cause is a falsehood. No, that's not because, that's not why. So let me start with this. It's pretty easy. In their mouth, a tongue deceitful. You know, a tongue is real easy. It's to listen. If you look at the bottom markings, LISUN, to listen. And without the markings, you know, it's the lesson, you know, what you getting from the tongue. The lesson, and trim it, to cut it short. And in their mouth, you know, is the PI here is the mouth, the pie. And the N is coming from this B. And EM is they're given there. And it's more is THEM, them. In pie them, in mouth them. To speak it. The lesson, to trim it. And so that's a deceitful tongue. You know, they're not telling the whole story. Although this doesn't mean tongue. And this doesn't mean deceitful. It just means trim it. Trim it down so it'll fit in your bag. You can carry it with you. You know, to trim this lesson short. And the lesson they're giving is, you know, key to give backwards and forwards. To give them hiero, the hieroglyphics. And, you know, the hiero is the works first to see connected. You have to learn the hieroglyphics first. Where bits of, just little tiny pieces, the letters, you know, to lie down the hieros, and that's where they're getting at is from this one letter, X is the plants, and where in plant to. And you'll see this bitsu, this is the same word they'll give like spider eggs or snake eggs, the bitsies and the bits to, you know, but where bits to is small pieces. To lay down the small pieces of the hieroglyphs, where bits to vein, you know, to shrink, to vein, wane, from her hand, where the bits of vein from her hand. So I'm fixing to do something that no Hebrew scholar in the world can do. I'm going to read this all, and I'm going to read every point and dot mark here. And there's no scholars that know how to do this. And you can see this at Wiki under Hebrew punctuation, you know. Like much biblical Hebrew punctuation, the meaning of the Pesach is not known. Although a number of hypotheses exist. And if you read all of them and then look where it's at, they have no idea. They don't have a clue. They put some names on these, and some of them show up very seldom, and they just name them for the word that they show up in. But every little mark has a reason, and they'll say they don't know. Just has to do with how you sing it. And the best part about this is it's all going to be in the language of the covenant in Brit, And you only have to learn one foreign word, and I'm glad I found this, and there's going to be no denying it, what that means, because it comes up all through the Bible. And it says Kavi, Kavi, and it means an Indian poet. And as I show you how to read this, there's going to be no doubt that that's exactly what that means. So if you hear somebody reading this and they say, Willa ya dabaruka zalba willa ya massy, they have no idea what they're reading. But the only way to read this with all these markings is it reads in 3 different levels, and it explains it here is what it says, of level. So in the level of Yasa, that's the slave, you see in his words, is to axe my maxa, to axe my massa, And so the slave's level, all he's doing is reading these letters and these dark directional markings. And so he's reading this as so writ is, it's so is writ. And roll, R-A-L, the rule, the roll, and L-A, and then backwards, the W. The laws, and O is of. You see it in Greek, they just put an O between words for of when it's somebody from somewhere. And so the laws of Yasa means I have commanded you, you shall do. Yasa, I do it. And it means, the works to see, consume to. Hey, go over there and tie that boat off. Yesa means I understand what you said and I will do it. Yesa. And of, O-V, and L-E-V, of the level. And of, A-V, of rub. And rub means first in. You pick up a stone and you give it a rub to see if it's worth cleaning up. You're trying to get in her pants, you start with a rub. The R, begin, to begin in. And the level of rub is the beginning, D-I-D, did brew. And brew is to cook it up. And will of rub did brew, cause bula, AxeMaximus. And did brew, did stir up the cause. And bula, is a bubble or document, a pharmacy medication package insert. Coming from Latin, the sealed document. And rub did brew cause bula, the bubble, foam at the mouth, and to axe my massa. And so to axe my massa is making fun of the way the slaves talk. This is A-S-K, the axe. But it's also, A-T-S-M, at some, and then emits. It's some removed, or it's some let out, emits. T-S, omits. At some omits. It's explaining that right here. And the A reading with this B of pium. And some omits of mouthum. You don't speak all the letters. And some omits of pium. The lesson to trim it, to cut it short, K-I, to give, and backwards, to give them, apostrophe E-M, to give them hyro, the hyro, and shall feed their flocks. And they're getting that from reading this bottom mark here, the Y-A-R, and then they're omitting this mark here. In fact, this dot here, they're saying it's an I, and they're wrong. It's an A. Single dot's an A. The double dots are the I. But they're missing them. But that's what they're getting at, is a yarrow shall feed their flocks. And what that means, the yarrow is a medicinal plant used as stench blood flow ancient times, but you don't feed it to your flocks unless your flocks are bees. The birds that use yarrow in their nests inhibits the growth of parasites. Yarrow's toxic to animals, dogs, cats, horses, but it's a companion plant, especially useful as a companion plant, attracting the beneficial insects. And so that tells me that shall feed their flocks is talking about, these are the brewers. and they're collecting honey, and the yarrow is good for their flocks. But when you're reading just the letters, it's to give them hiero, Hirow, the hieroglyphics, where bits to vein from her hand. To vein is to stream out, and where bits, the little bitty pieces, to vein from her hand. My mama used to call insects, bits, the bits, where the bits to vein much rid, to get rid of the problem bugs, the yarrow. So if we look in this other Bible, we can see that this whole chapter, it's all one-liners. And this one-liner is the only one that ends with this S, which I believe meant seal. I believe it went with a picture. So that means it should make sense if we read it all three different ways all at once here. So the main difference in these words and the words we use is how they separate the words. When we read a word, we only read it one time, so we know where the start and ending is going to be. But in this fashion of writing, the words can mix up, or it might even be a word in the back half of another of the laws, and then it's going to read a third time. And so the reason for breaking the words is to shift letters around when you're reading different directional markings. So I'm going to read the upper markings now because there's way less of them. It's way less confusing than the lower markings. But this dot up here means start with a O, and so it's an OS. It's as, and then ARIT, as are it, and then come back and get this. This mark up top says the writ. As are it writ, and then ISORAL is oral. And then this mark says this much of this word, again without the vowel points. So is ra lo, the dot up there, is ra lo, and then AV of su, yesa. As are it writ is oral, is said, is ra lo of su. This is a S-O and then a O, a su. And so Rallo of su means to drain the swamp. Is said to drain the swamp. Coming from the old Proto-Finnic, all the ancient Germanic languages, su meaning a swamp, marsh, or bog. Estonian, Finnish, all the languages. That was the swamp. And Rallo from Latin rallum, the rallos, the drain hole. And yes, sir, shall do. As are it writ is oral, is rallo of su, yes, sir. Has been written and has been said, drain the swamp, yes, sir. And so this yes is going with the vowel point up top, and so you have an extra vav, and it's end of lee, L-E-E, with mark up here. End of lee, end of downwind, of the past, will of, the dot up here is a O, will of, and then A-U-R, in the past, will of or, and then B-I-D-I-D, bidded by R-U-K-Z-Y, the ruxy below, the crowds, the ruxy below, and AxeMaximus, with the dot in the M, now you're picking up the A underneath, so it changes from just reading the letters. And the AxeMaximus. And then the A reading with the B-I here, Abi. The father pie, the mouth, Abi pium. And father says, los on, those on to remit. And then the dot and the K is telling you to pick up. And so that's the cavi. And then backwards, the EM, and then the AE is the ES. And the cavium is, and then the MAE again, the mess. And that's where they get in this shall feed, the mess hall. Will AxeMaximus of the pium, the max of he mouthum, los on, of your own to remit, and turned in by your own people. And The cavium is M-I-R-O-V, the messer of. And that's probably where your ancient word euro come from, the European. But a cavium, C-A-V-I-E-M, it's a traveling freak show. It's side shows, concessions, and rides, the carnival. And the carnival is messer of. And then this almost reads the same. There's no marking except here. And it just turns this in from a bitsu to a bits of. And it's to wear the bits of vein from her hand. And so this makes me think it's talking about Freya. She's a god of destruction, and she rides a chariot, but with no bits. She got the rain veining from her hand, but she got no bits. You can't put bits in a cat's mouth. As are it writ, is oral, is Rollo, is said, drain the swamp. Of past, of lee, of the past, will of oar, will of row the oar, will of steer, will of oar, bidded by rooks of below, bidded to raise your hand, in through hand by, and so the rooks, all the lower tiers of the pyramid, all the people, to steer bidded by the rooks, by all the lowers below. AxeMaximus, cut off their head. That's where the word Christmas comes from. The AxeMax. Of he pie, of he said them, los own, of their own to remit. Cavium, the carnival is the messer of, where bits of vein from her hand. The bits of vein, there is none. There is no bits from her hand. So this is actually supposed to be the third reading. You're supposed to read just the letters first and then the lower markings. But there's so much more of them, it's going to get really long. And so I'm going to put that in part 2 here. But I want to show you where it's still talking about the language in part 2 and when you're reading the lower. And so this a tongue deceitful for they. This is where this word becomes the poet. And so when you're reading these lower markings here, this is T-O, and then this is R-Y-M, and then an A-V underneath in I-T. And to rhyme of it, the Kavi, the poet. And so that's, it's still talking about the language. And it'll explain more of the language, why it reads. You had different classes of people, But by the time the rage set in, it was where bidded by the rooks below. All of us lowers finally decided it was time to max their ass, to have our Christmas. Of he pie, of he said them, and los of their own to remit. The cavium, the carnival. But my program just crashed, so let me get this last end on here. But yeah, you can see why they want to change the language. They don't want us to know what this said. They don't want us to know that it's possible to revolt against our government. But when it comes down, they shall be found, and they will catch the AxeMax. Alright, I'll get that third line up by tomorrow and put these in a folder together, and I'll start backtracking and check out some more words I run into when I got here. Good day.